The warhammer, a monstrous thing of black iron and steel spikes, whistled past Rhaegar's ear. It was a sound of absolute finality, the noise a falling star might make just before impact. He felt the displaced air whip his silver hair across his face, cold and sharp with the river's spray. Robert Baratheon was a storm-given flesh, a bellowing giant whose rage was a physical force. He swung the hammer again, a blow meant to crush, to obliterate. Rhaegar, lighter, quicker, danced back on the shifting stones of the trident's ruby ford. His shield, emblazoned with the three-headed dragon of his house, caught the next blow. The wood and steel screamed, splintering, his arm jarring to the shoulder with a pain so profound it felt like his bones had turned to glass. Robert roared, a sound of pure triumph, believing him disarmed. But Rhaegar's sword was still in his right hand. He saw the opening, a gap of a single heartbeat beneath the Baratheon lord's raised arms. Robert's breastplate was a masterpiece of Stormlander craft, enameled with a proud stag, but it was dented and scarred from the battle. Rhaegar did not thrust for the steel. He thrust for the joint, the small, vulnerable space where the arm met the torso. His Valyrian steel blade, Blackfire's twin, slid home. There was no sound of metal on metal, only a soft, wet puncture. Robert's roar choked off into a gurgle of disbelief. The fury in his eyes, a blue flame that had set a kingdom alight, flickered and then died, replaced by a confused, almost childlike surprise. He looked down at the hilt of the sword buried deep in his armpit, then back up at Rhaegar. "Lyanna," Robert coughed, a spray of blood dotting Rhaegar's silver armor like crimson jewels. The name was not an accusation. It was a question, a prayer. Rhaegar felt a sorrow so deep it threatened to drown him there in the rushing water. He had not wanted this. He had wanted to sing, to rule, to bring forth the promised prince from the union of ice and fire. He had never wanted to be a warrior. But the dragon was a warrior, and he was the dragon. He twisted the blade. Robert Baratheon, the Storm King, the laughing demon of the battlefield, fell to his knees in the churning, red water. The great warhammer slipped from his grasp and was swept away by the current. Rhaegar pulled his sword free and stood over his fallen foe. The ruby-encrusted armor that had given the ford its name, now indistinguishable from the real blood clouding the river. The battle raged around them, but in this small circle of death, there was only the sound of the water and Robert's last, ragged breath. He had won. The rebellion was broken. And as he looked up from the corpse of the man who had loved Lyanna Stark, Rhaegar Targaryen felt not the thrill of victory, but the cold, dead weight of the crown he had just saved. A crown that rested on his father's head. The return to King's Landing was not a triumph. It was a descent. The city stank of fear, a sour, acidic smell that clung to the back of the throat. It was the smell of his father's reign. Lord Rossart, the pyromancer with his soft, clammy hands and eyes that held the ecstasy of the flame, greeted him at the gates. He spoke of caches of wildfire, of the king's final solution should the rebels have breached the walls. Rhaegar felt a chill colder than any northern winter. He had ridden to save his dynasty, but he had returned to find he'd merely preserved the rot at its heart. He found Aerys in the throne room, a skeletal figure perched on the iron throne like a decrepit vulture. The king's hair was a matted, filthy tangle that reached his waist, his fingernails long, yellowed claws. He was surrounded not by his Kingsguard, but by his pyromancers. The air was thick with the cloying sweetness of their alchemical reagents. "You killed him!" Eris rasped, his voice a dry rustle of dead leaves. "The usurper." "Dead." "He is dead, your grace," Rhaegar said, kneeling. His armor was still stained with the mud and blood of the trident. He had not wanted to clean it. He wanted his father to see the price of his madness. "Good. Good." The king giggled, a horrid, high-pitched sound. "Burn them all. Burn their castles. Sow their fields with salt. I want the Stormlands a black, glassy plain. I want the north silent under a sheet of ice. I want the memory of Stark and Baratheon erased from the world." Sir Jaime Lannister stood at the foot of the throne, a statue in white and gold. His face was a mask of perfect, handsome indifference, but Rhaegar saw the flicker in his green eyes. He saw the disgust. The young knight had been a witness to the king's ravings, to the brutal executions of Brandon and Rickard Stark, to the endless whispers of wildfire and betrayal. Rhaegar had left a boy in that white cloak when he rode to war. He returned to find a man haunted by the vows he had kept. "Father," Rhaegar said, his voice quiet but firm, "the war is won. Now is the time for mercy. We must bind the realm's wounds, not create new ones." Eris's eyes, pale and violet, narrowed into slits. "Mercy? They showed me mercy when they tried to steal my throne. They showed my son mercy when they crowned a drunken fool in his stead? No, no mercy. Traitors' heads on spikes. That is the only mercy they understand." He pointed a claw-like finger at Jaime. "You, Lannister's whelp. You agree, don't you? Your father understands. He understands what must be done with traitors." Jaime's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. His oath was to the king, not to the king's sanity. Rhaegar rose to his feet. "Lord Tywin sits at Casterly Rock, awaiting the outcome. He did not rise for us, father. He will not applaud pointless butchery. And the other lords, Stark's second son still holds the north. Hoster Tully has an army at River Run. Jon Arryn is in the Eyrie. If we answer their rebellion with nothing but fire and death, we will rule over a kingdom of ash and bone. The war will never end." "It ends when I say it ends," Eris shrieked, spittle flying from his lips. "I am the king. It was my throne they sought to steal. I will have their heads, all of them. Bring me Ned Stark's head." Rhaegar stood his ground. He was the hero of the trident, the savior of the city. The lords and knights of the Crownlands who had followed him to battle were his men now, in a way they had never been his father's. For the first time, he felt the shift of power in the room, a palpable thing. It was flowing away from the twisted man on the throne and toward him. "Eddard Stark and Hoster Tully have bent the knee," Rhaegar lied, his voice ringing with an authority that was not his to claim. "They have been promised the king's peace in exchange for their surrender. Lord Arryn is in negotiations. It is done." Eris stared at him, his mad eyes wide with suspicion and fury. He saw the truth in his son's defiance. He saw the beginning of his own irrelevance. He opened his mouth to scream, to call for Rossart, to give the order that would burn them all. But he saw the look in Rhaegar's eyes. It was not the look of a poet or a scholar. It was the look of the dragon that had slain the stag. The Mad King slumped back into his throne of swords, silent and trembling, a king in name only. Rhaegar had saved the Targaryen dynasty, but the war for its soul was just beginning. 10 years passed, 10 years of a long, cold peace. Aerys the second Targaryen still lived, a ghost haunting his own court. He rarely left his chambers now, attended only by his pyromancers and the few lickspittles too craven to abandon him. He was the king, but the sun had set on his reign. The realm was ruled by the Prince of Dragonstone. Rhaegar's court was a place of quiet melancholy and simmering tension. He had brought music and beauty back to the Red Keep, but a shadow lay over it all. He had pardoned the rebels, a decision that earned him his father's eternal hatred and the grudging respect of the lords he had defeated. Ned Stark had been permitted to take the Black, a mercy that felt like a punishment to the north. His younger brother, Benjen, a boy forced to become a man overnight, ruled Winterfell as warden, his loyalty to the crown a brittle thing. Stannis Baratheon had been stripped of Storm's End, the castle and its lands granted to the ever-loyal Tyrells, a constant, galling reminder of his brother's failure. Stannis himself lived in genteel exile on Dragonstone, a bitter man counting his grievances. His younger brother, Renly, was a ward of the crown, a charming, hollow boy growing up in the viper's nest of the court. And then there was Lyanna. She was not a queen. Elia Martell, frail and sad-eyed, still held that title, living in quiet seclusion in the Maiden Vault with her daughter, Rhaenys. Rhaegar had not set Elia aside, for that would have meant war with Dorne, but all the world knew where his heart lay. Lyanna Stark, the she-wolf of Winterfell, lived in a handsome manse overlooking the Blackwater, a public secret. She was the prince's love, the mother of his youngest son, Aemon, a boy with the dark hair of a Stark and the deep, violet eyes of a Targaryen. He was the reason for it all, the prince that was promised. The court was a tapestry of these tensions. Oberyn Martell was a frequent visitor, his swagger and dangerous smiles a constant reminder of his sister's honor. He would watch Lyanna with undisguised contempt, his eyes lingering on Rhaegar with a look that promised vengeance. Lord Tywin Lannister had been named Hand of the King once more, a reward for his timely inaction during the rebellion. His daughter, the beautiful and furious Cersei, remained unwed, a treasure too valuable to be wasted on a lesser lord now that the prince was unavailable. She watched Lyanna with a hatred that was almost pure. In the gardens one afternoon, a young Daenerys Targaryen sat with Lyanna, watching the children play. Daenerys was a shy, quiet girl of 12, with the classic Valyrian beauty of her house. She adored Rhaegar, and, by extension, she adored the woman he loved. She saw nothing of politics, only the fairy tale. Her brother, Viserys, a boy of 14, stood nearby, his hands clenched. He was the second son, forgotten and resentful, overshadowed by the hero of the trident. "Aemon is fast," Daenerys said, her voice soft. The boy was chasing his half-sister, Rhaenys, their laughter echoing through the cypress trees. "He has the wolf's blood," Lyanna replied. Her northern accent was still there, though softened by years in the south. She rarely smiled. The ghost of the war, of the thousands who died for her and Rhaegar, was always with her. She was no longer the wild girl who had ridden into Harrenhal. She was a woman trapped in a gilded cage of her own making. Viserys sneered. "The pup's blood, you mean? He's a bastard. My father says so. He says the dragon does not mate with wolves." Lyanna's face hardened. "Your father says many things, Viserys, most of them in the dark, to men who smell of ash." Viserys flushed, his temper as quick and volatile as his father's. "Don't you speak of my father. One day I will be king after Rhaegar, and I will remember this. I will remember the disrespect." "You will be nothing," Lyanna said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous tone. "You are a weak, cruel boy, just like him. You are the shadow of a snake." Before Viserys could retort, Rhaegar appeared. He was in his late 30s now, lines of care etched around his violet eyes. He carried his harp. "Viserys," he said, his voice calm but brooking no argument. "Leave us." Viserys shot a hateful glare at Lyanna and stalked away. Rhaegar sat beside her, laying his harp on the grass. "The same argument?" "He has his father's poison in him," Lyanna said, her gaze fixed on her son. "And your father's spies watch me constantly. They watch Aemon. I feel their eyes even in my sleep." "I know," Rhaegar said, his voice laced with weariness. "I protect you. I will always protect you." He looked at his son, the boy he believed was the song of ice and fire, the savior of the world. He had spilled a river of blood to create him. He had broken a kingdom to bring him into the world. And yet, the greatest danger to them all still lived, festering in the heart of the Red Keep, wearing his own face. In Winterfell, the cold was a living thing. It seeped through the stone walls, through the thickest firs, and settled deep in the bones. Lord Benjen Stark felt it had taken root in his soul. He had been a boy when his father and brother were murdered, when his sister ran away with a dragon prince, when his other brother went to war and never came home, save as a disgraced member of the Night's Watch. Now he was Lord of Winterfell, a title he had never wanted, ruling a people whose loyalty was to the memory of the Starks who were gone, not to him. He sat in the great hall, listening to a dispute between two petty lords over stolen sheep. His master, Lewin, stood beside him, whispering advice. Benjen's face was grim, his long, stark features set in a permanent frown. He missed the easy laughter of his youth. He missed his brothers. He missed the sister who had started it all. After the tedious court was done, a black-clad rider was announced, a brother of the Night's Watch. Benjen's heart gave a lurch. It had been years since he had seen Ned. The man who entered the hall was gaunt and hard, his eyes the gray of a winter sky. He was clean-shaven, his dark hair cropped short. The only warmth in his face came when he saw Benjen. They embraced, a fierce, desperate hug. "Brother," Ned's voice was rough, unused to softness. "You should not have come," Benjen said, leading him to his solar, away from prying eyes. "The Targaryens watch us. They watch everything. The Lord Commander sent me. We have need of more men. And more than that." Ned looked out the window toward the vast, empty lands to the north. Things are stirring beyond the wall. Wildling attacks are more frequent, more organized. The old tales, the rangers speak of them in whispers. White shadows in the woods, eyes like blue stars. Benjen poured 2 cups of wine. Old tales. The others have been gone for 8,000 years. Have they? Ned's gaze was intense. I have walked the wall for 10 years, Benjen. I have listened to the wind coming down from the frost fangs. It is a different wind now. It carries a cold that has nothing to do with winter. He took a raven scroll from his cloak. It was sealed with the Targaryen dragon. "This came to Castle Black a fortnight ago, from the prince." Benjen broke the seal. It was a royal decree, penned in Rhaegar's elegant script. It spoke of the coming winter and the need for the Night's Watch to be strong. It granted the Watch new lands in the gift and promised a shipment of dragonglass from the stores on Dragonstone. Dragonglass? Benjen frowned. Why? Perhaps the prince reads the same old tales we do, Ned said quietly. He was always one for prophecies and books, but 100 weight of dragonglass and a few acres of frozen land will not stop what is coming. The realm must be united. It must be strong. And it is not. It is a house built on lies and resentment, ruled by a good man who serves a mad one. Rhaegar is not his father, Benjen argued, though his voice lacked conviction. No, he is not, Ned agreed. He is honorable, he is thoughtful, and he will stand by and watch his father burn the world to spite him because he is too honorable to do what is necessary. He thinks he can save us with a song. Ned looked at his younger brother, his eyes filled with a deep, abiding sorrow. He cannot. I have seen the true enemy, Benjen. It does not have a crown. It does not sit on a throne of swords. It comes with the cold and the dark, and it will not be stopped by a prince with a harp. From the highest tower of Casterly Rock, Tywin Lannister could see the sun setting over the sea, turning the waves to molten gold. It was a sight that had always pleased him. Gold, power, the legacy of his house. For 10 years, he had worked to restore that legacy from the brink of ruin. His decision to remain neutral in the rebellion had been a calculated risk, one that had nearly cost him everything. Had Robert won, the Lannisters would have been lauded as heroes. With Rhaegar's victory, they were suspect, dangerous. He had accepted the position of hand, not out of loyalty, but out of necessity. It allowed him to be at the center of the web, to mend the torn strands of his influence. But it was a constant humiliation. He served a madman and advised a prince who listened to prophecies instead of reason. A prince who had rejected his daughter. Cersei entered the solar. At 26, her beauty was a weapon she had sharpened to a razor's edge. But 10 years of disappointment had left a bitter twist to her perfect mouth. She had been raised to be a queen, and she was nothing. "Another letter from Lord Frey," she said, tossing it onto the table. "He wishes to know if his son is still a suitable match for me. He includes a drawing of the boy. He has a chin like a weasel." "The Freys are ambitious," Tywin said, not looking at her. "Their bridge is strategic." "I will not marry a Frey," Cersei said, her voice like ice. "I will not be sold off like a brood mare to some grasping river lord." "You will marry whom I command you to marry," Tywin stated, his voice flat and final. "Your value diminishes with each passing year. You could have been queen, you should have been queen, but the prince chose his northern whore." The old, familiar rage flared in Cersei's green eyes. "Do not call her that. He loved her. He fought a war for her. What has any man ever done for me but try to use me?" Her eyes flickered toward the door, a brief, almost imperceptible glance. Tywin knew she was thinking of Jaime. Her twin, her other half, still trapped in King's Landing, chained to a madman by a white cloak. Another piece of his legacy that the Targaryens had stolen from him. "Love is a child's fancy," Tywin said contemptuously. "Rhaegar's love for the Stark girl has split the realm in two. It has insulted the Dornish, angered the Stormlords, and left the North simmering with resentment. His love is a weakness, and I will use it." Cersei looked at him, her interest piqued. "How?" "The king grows more erratic by the day," Tywin mused, his fingers steepled before him. "He trusts no one but his pyromancers. He sees assassins in every shadow. He particularly loathes the Stark girl and her bastard whelp. He sees them, correctly, as a threat to the legitimate line, to Elaya's children, to Viserys. Aerys is a withered husk. Rhaegar holds all the power. He holds the love of the small folk and the loyalty of the soldiers who fought with him. But power in the Red Keep is a more subtle thing. It is a word whispered in the right ear, a fear stoked in a paranoid mind." He finally turned to look at his daughter, his pale green eyes cold and calculating. "Rhaegar's weakness is his honor. He will not move against his own father. He will wait for the old man to die. but a king's fear can be a powerful motivator. If Aerys believes, truly believes, that the she-wolf and her cub are plotting to supplant Ilia's children, he is unpredictable. He might do something rash, something that would force the honorable prince's hand. Cersei understood. A small, cruel smile touched her lips. A word from the hand of the king, attesting to suspicious movements around the Stark girl's manse. A paid servant's testimony. A forged letter. The king's paranoia will do the rest, Tywin finished. Let the dragons fight. Let them burn each other. And when the smoke clears, the lion will be the one left standing on the ashes. He looked back out at the golden sea. The sun had vanished. The world was dark. The breaking point came on the Prince Aemon's 4th name day. It was not a grand affair. Rhaegar, sensitive to the political delicacy of his son's existence, had arranged a small gathering at Lyanna's manse. Elia Martell remained at the Red Keep with Rhaenys and Aegon. It was a day meant for quiet joy, a brief respite from the court's endless scheming. The joy lasted less than an hour. Sir Barristan Selmy arrived, his face grim, his white cloak stark against the garden's greenery. "Your Grace," he said, bowing to Rhaegar, "the king demands your presence, and the boys." A cold dread settled in Rhaegar's stomach. For what purpose? He would not say, "My prince," only that Lord Tywin has brought him news of a most serious nature. Lyanna stepped forward, her hand instinctively going to Aemon's shoulder. "He's not taking my son." Her voice was low, the growl of a wolf protecting her cub. "I will handle this," Rhaegar said, though his own heart hammered against his ribs. He knew his father. He knew Tywin Lannister. This was a move on the Cyvasse board, and his son was the peace being threatened. He went to the throne room alone, leaving Aemon with Lyanna and a cordon of his most trusted household guards. The chamber was lit by flickering torches, casting long, dancing shadows. Aerys was on the throne, looking more animated than he had in years. A feverish energy burned in his eyes. Lord Tywin stood at his right hand, his face a granite mask. Lord Rossart and 2 other pyromancers stood behind the throne, their robes the color of dried blood. "You came!" Aerys cackled. "Where is the wolf's bastard?" "He's with his mother," Rhaegar said, his voice dangerously level. "What is the meaning of this, father?" "The hand has brought me proof," Aerys shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at Tywin. "Proof of treason. Your northern whore plots with her brother at the wall. They mean to kill my true grandchildren, Aegon and Rhaenys, and place her bastard on the throne after you." Tywin Lannister spoke, his voice a cold baritone. "Your Grace, a letter was intercepted. From the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch to Lord Benjen Stark. It speaks of a Prince of the North who will unite the realm against the darkness. It was coded, but the meaning is clear. It was a lie, a masterful, venomous lie. Rhaegar knew Ned. He would never plot such a thing. But the seed of the idea, planted in the fertile ground of his father's paranoia, had taken root and blossomed into a thorny vine of madness in an instant. "I have seen it!" Aerys screamed. "The flames do not lie. I have seen the wolf devouring the dragon. She will kill us all. I will not allow it. I will do what I should have done 10 years ago. I will burn the treason out, root and stem." He leaned forward, his eyes wide and staring. "Rossart, bring me the wolf bitch and her cub. Bring them to the throne room. You and your brothers will give them a traitor's death, a fiery death. The Lannister Lord says she is beautiful. Let's see how beautiful she is when she is burning." Rhaegar stared at his father. The moment he had dreaded for a decade had arrived. The final, irrevocable line had been crossed. He could not reason with this. He could not placate it. He could only destroy it, or be destroyed by it. "You will not touch them," Rhaegar said. The words were not loud, but they silenced the room. They were spoken with the absolute authority of a king. Aerys gaped at him. "I am the king. I command it. And I forbid it." Rhaegar turned his gaze on Tywin Lannister. He saw the flicker of triumph in the hand's eyes. This was the moment Tywin had engineered. The moment the son would be forced to turn on the father. "You have played your game well, Lord Hand, but you have misjudged the pieces." He turned back to Aerys. The sorrow he had felt at the trident returned, 1,000 times heavier. "Father, you are unwell. You are no longer fit to rule. For the good of the realm, for the preservation of our house, I am relieving you of your duties. You will be confined to your chambers, where you will be well cared for, but you will not sit this throne again." Aerys's face contorted in a mask of pure fury. "Traitor! Kinslayer! You would depose your own king, your own father. Guards, seize him! Sir Jaime, your oath. Protect your king." Jaime Lannister, who had been standing silently by the throne, took a step forward. His hand rested on the gilded lion's head of his pommel. His green eyes met Rhaegar's violet ones. For a long moment, the fate of the dynasty hung on the decision of a 27-year-old knight. He had sworn a vow to protect the king. But which king? The madman who would burn children alive, or the prince who was the realm's only hope? Jaime's eyes flickered to Tywin. He saw his father's plan laid bare. He saw the cold ambition that had orchestrated this entire crisis. And he made his choice. He did not draw his sword. He simply stood aside, creating a clear path between Rhaegar and the Iron Throne. It was not the grand, dramatic act of defiance he might have once imagined. It was a quiet, simple, and world-altering refusal to act. Aerys screamed, a long, piercing sound of impotent rage. "Burn them! Burn them all!" he shrieked at Rossart. The pyromancer took a step forward, his hand reaching for a hidden vial. But before he could move further, Rhaegar's sword was in his hand. It was the Valyrian steel blade that had killed Robert Baratheon. He did not hesitate. He lunged, not at his father, but at the hand of the king, the pyromancer. Lord Rossart made a soft, surprised sound as the sword slid through his robes and into his heart. He fell without a word. The other two pyromancers froze, their courage failing them without their master. Rhaegar stood over the dead pyromancer, his sword dripping. He looked at his father, a broken, trembling old man on a chair of sharp metal. "It is over," he said, his voice filled with a weariness that went beyond bone, beyond soul. "The reign of fire is over." The coup was swift and almost bloodless. With Jaime Lannister and the Kingsguard refusing to defend Aerys, the castle was Rhaegar's. The Mad King was confined to the highest room of the Maiden Vault, the windows barred, his only companions the ghosts of his own paranoia. He would live out his days a prisoner in his own home, a fate Rhaegar deemed more merciful than the executioner's block. Kinslaying was a stain that could never be washed away. Rhaegar summoned the small council to the throne room. He did not sit the Iron Throne. Instead, he stood before it, his silver armor still bearing the single spot of Rossart's blood. Lord Tywin was there, his face unreadable. He had lost his gambit. Rossart's death meant there would be no chaotic burning of the Red Keep from which he could profit. But he had still won. Aerys was gone, and a new, more pliable king would reign. Varys the spider watched from the shadows, his powdered face serene. Grand Maester Pycelle wrung his hands, his loyalty shifting as easily as the wind. "My lords," Rhaegar began, his voice echoing in the cavernous hall. "For the stability of the Seven Kingdoms and the health of the royal line, I am, by right of blood and by necessity of circumstance, assuming the duties of the crown. I declare myself Lord Protector of the Realm and Prince Regent." No one objected. The transfer of power had been absolute. A raven arrived from Casterly Rock that very evening. It was from Tywin, who had already departed the city. It was a letter of fealty to the new Prince Regent, filled with pledges of loyalty and service. It also contained a subtle but unmistakable demand that the insult to House Lannister be rectified, that Cersei be made queen. Rhaegar knew he could not refuse. Tywin's power was too great, his gold too necessary for the stability of the kingdom. But he would not set aside Lyanna. To do so would be to invite the wrath of Dorne. He sent a raven back with a counter-proposal. Princess Daenerys, his younger sister, would be betrothed to Jaime Lannister's younger brother, the dwarf Tyrion, binding the houses. As for Queen Cersei, there was another king who would need a wife. His brother Viserys, now the heir presumptive until Rhaegar's own sons were legitimized, would marry Cersei Lannister. It was a brilliant move. It gave Tywin his queen, but it yoked her to the weakest, most volatile member of the royal family, ensuring she would be a queen with no power. It was an insult wrapped in a gift. The Game of Thrones would continue. A month later, after a formal declaration of Aerys's incapacity by the Grand Maester and the High Septon, Rhaegar Targaryen, the first of his name, was crowned. His first act as king was to legitimize his son, Aemon, and his second was to marry the boy's mother. Elia Martell graciously stepped aside, accepting the title of Dowager Princess and retiring to Sunspear with her daughter Rhaenys, her son Aegon, remaining in King's Landing as Rhaegar's ward, a beloved nephew and a hostage in equal measure. On the day of his wedding to Lyanna Stark, the great sept of Baelor was filled with the lords of the realm. Lyanna was radiant in a gown of white silk, a circlet of winter roses in her dark hair. Rhaegar looked every inch the king, noble and solemn. As the High Septon bound their hands together, Rhaegar looked out at the faces in the crowd. He saw the cold fury in Oberyn Martell's eyes, the bitter resentment on Stannis Baratheon's face, the calculating ambition of Tywin Lannister. He had won. He had his love, his crown, and his son, now Prince Aemon Targaryen, stood beside him. He had brought the Song of Ice and Fire to life. But it was a bittersweet victory. He was a usurper in all but name, a man who had deposed his own father. He ruled a kingdom of factions and feuds, held together by fear and fragile alliances. He had saved the realm from his father's madness, but he had created a dozen new wounds in the process. Far to the north, on the wall, a lone figure stood watch. Lord Commander Eddard Stark read the royal proclamation announcing the coronation of King Rhaegar and Queen Lyanna. He felt nothing. Not joy, not anger, not even the dull ache of sorrow that had been his companion for a decade. He had lost his father, his brother, and his best friend to the ambitions of dragons. His sister was a queen on a throne of bones. He folded the parchment and tucked it into his black cloak. He did not look south, toward the world of men and their endless, petty wars. He looked north, where the sky was a bruised purple and the wind carried the promise of a winter unlike any other. The sun was setting, and the cold was deepening. The real war, the only war that mattered, was coming, and he wondered if anyone would be left to fight it.